Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Hello, this is Joe Jackson from the New Stack, and today we have Brandon Burns and Gabe Monroy from Microsoft. Gentlemen, thank you.
Great to be here.
Yeah, great to be here. Yeah.
So you guys have been keeping busy doing even more work. We're at the Kubecon this year, and you guys made a number of new announcements and unveilings, and we just want to find out a bit more about them.
Sure, yeah. I would say it's not necessarily us that's been keeping busy, it's really been the whole team. So I want to kind of give them a shout out and recognize their work. We had a bunch of different open source projects that we launched today. The work with the Virtual Kubelet is one of the most exciting things for me anyway. So about 4 or 5 months ago, we launched Azure Container Instances, which is a serverless containers product. And I think over that time, we've seen a lot of interest by people, but they also want to build orchestration on top. So you might want to, have something that you run every hour or something like that. And we from the get-go thought of Azure Container Instances as a low-level piece of orchestration, and we want to use Kubernetes as the higher-level orchestration. So Kubernetes has a scheduled job. You can go line up scheduled job with Azure Container Instances. You can have something that runs every hour, and you're only paying for while that container is running. You're not paying for the nodes just sitting there not doing anything.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing for me was Azure Container Instances was a first of its kind product. We were the first major cloud to produce it, and we didn't really know where it was going to go, right? Because there wasn't a roadmap for this. But one of the things we felt really strongly about was that orchestration, was a line that we didn't want to cross with the product, because perfectly good orchestration out there. It's called Kubernetes, and so when we launched it, we actually shipped this connector that Brendan's referring to. The folks at Hyper.sh actually had a similar product, and they actually forked the code base, our ACI connector code base, and tied it into Hyper. And Brendan and I were like, oh wow, that's interesting.
And I think they forked it because we called it the Azure Connector, right? We didn't turn it into a generic open pluggable interface. And so what we've done with this announce is to really create a community-wide project that can be plugged into Hyper, that can be plugged into Azure. And honestly, here at the conference, we've had a conversation with a number of other vendors who are interested in participating as well. And so I think we kind of proved out the concept, learned a lot, and now we were ready to sort of put something forth that the entire community could use. Yep. There's still a lot of really interesting open questions left that we need to sort out with Kubernetes and the scheduler and all that sort of stuff, but I think we'll have those conversations not as Azure, but as a group that's interested in serverless containers.
Excellent. Now, how can it be used in deployment if you're interested in doing serverless? How would the admin use it?
Well, actually, that's one of the interesting things we shipped as part of the Virtual Kubelet sort of announcement. We shipped integration into the Azure CLI, where you can use a very simple command to install this new Virtual Kubelet into your AKS cluster, our managed Kubernetes product, and you can kick the tires on this thing today. Right? You go actually run this right now, and using some simple scheduling affinities inside of Kubernetes, you can make sure that your workloads get placed onto the Virtual Kubelet and thereby onto ACI, and start experimenting with the benefits of microbilling and the invisible infrastructure that ACI provides.
Burst capabilities, so you don't have to keep standing resources for peak load or for dev test. Yep. You're only going to pay for containers that are in active use. So I think it's a great fit for CI/CD, some batch processing, anything where you don't have something running all the time and you don't want to pay when you're not running.
Gotcha. All right, terrific. And so this is open source available for all.
Yep, up on GitHub, and actually actively working with multiple companies right now. So not just open source, but actually a real collaboration.
Right. Folks from Hyper, for example, are actually maintainers on the project repo with us. It was important to us that we launch with active maintainers from other companies.
Yeah. Terrific. Now you're also talking about you're doing more of the open service broker API. explain what's going on.
Yeah, I think the open service broker is interesting. You run across this question of just because you can run things inside of containers doesn't necessarily mean you should, and specifically run them and operate them yourself. So a lot of customers. I was in Hong Kong recently with a connected retail startup, and they built their app on Ruby on Rails and got it to market quickly, but it's at scale, and they're using Azure today. And one of the guy who's in charge of the technology there, one of his interview questions is about running Postgres in a container, and basically if the interviewee says you can run it in a container, they don't get through the interview, right? And the reason behind that is because the technical capabilities aren't necessarily as important as things like a service level agreement or the capable backup and restore and the things that hyperscale clouds can deliver to customers around some of these mission critical data stores. So what the open service broker for Azure does is it bridges the world of Kubernetes with the world of Azure services, things like Azure Cosmos DB, Postgres, MySQL, and it allows you to manage those things with your app. So you can have a Helm package, and we actually delivered this as part of the announcement, a Helm repo, where we have a WordPress. WordPress still powers some insane percentage of the web right now. WordPress with the MySQL database, not running in a container, but running via the open service broker API.
And in Azure.
In Azure.
As a software as a service, right? So you don't maintain it, you don't back it up. The MySQL is a service that Azure provides instead of you having to sort of do care and feeding yourself.
Yeah.
So this is good for my own applications that I bring to Azure that I want to expose as a service?
No, it's that you have applications where you want that needs something, generally a storage backend, although not exclusively, but generally a storage backend, and you want to build your application in a way that you're not tied to any particular cloud. Your application just comes in and says, hey, I need a MySQL. Where's a MySQL? This broker is the thing that then says, aha, I'm on Azure. I can give you a managed MySQL via the Azure SQL API, give you back the credentials, you can log into it, but you actually don't ever know where that MySQL came from. Right. It's just happens to be there, right? And if you go back on-prem for development or because for whatever reason, maybe then that MySQL will get turned up via the Service Broker API in a container, right? You're not going to have as great an experience with that because you're going to have to maintain it yourself. You're going to have to do all the DRI that Azure would do for you. But maybe for dev test or for local development, that's okay, right?
And I think this is a good example of, we talk to a lot of ops teams, both Brendan and I, and this is just an example of, meeting the customer where they are. Customers want these managed data services. We need to find a way to make it easy to bring those services to folks who are using Kubernetes, betting on CNCF, and that's what we've done with those.
Or even in a hybrid scenario, right? I think we actually ran into a customer who had kind of rolled their own service, hadn't heard of the Service Broker API, and had kind of rolled their own, but they didn't love it, and I was like, oh, that looks like the Service Broker API, you should talk to this team over here. Now they're happily switched over to this open API that works, that has a broad community of support around it, that allows them to work both on-prem as well as in Azure, or even other public clouds.
Excellent. Now, does this would it incorporate the whole range of Azure services, or is
there's a little over a dozen services in there today, and as Brendan mentioned, a lot of them are focused on data like storage and databases. That's where a lot of the value is. But there's also things like Key Vault, even ACI. The semantics for this are basically provision, deprovision, bind, and unbind. Bind meaning attached to an application. So anything that can work with those verbs, you can model via the service broker.
Yeah, for sure.
Excellent. All right, terrific. And the third announcement, you guys are doing a dashboard and visualization tool.
For Brigade.
So I think Brigade is interesting. I think it really stems from the idea that Turing complete YAML is a bad idea, right? Modeling things like control flow and concurrency primitives inside of YAML, it just doesn't scale, it doesn't work. And yet we need to do those things, right? Like, there's a lot of cases, ETL, CI/CD, batch processing, where you really need to model things like, fan out, collect results, fan back in, different processing and control flows, and sometimes you want to run things in parallel, sometimes you want to run them in serial. You need to be able to script those sort of workflows in Kubernetes. And the term for this in the industry is sort of a workflow engine is kind of the term for this. So what we built with Brigade is we built a JavaScript runtime that sits on top of Kubernetes and it calls out to Kubernetes. So you can model all those things I described using very simple JavaScript. And all those concurrency primitives, and we think CI is seeming to be one of the killer use cases for this, but it's really a building block. It's a component that we thought was important that the industry have something here, and people are really excited about it. Well, what we've done with Kashti, though, is we've added a UI and a dashboard, actually a terrific dashboard, that gives you visualization into your logs and sort of the ordered execution, so you kind of debug these evented models.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that oftentimes it's pretty easy. Brigade really makes it easy to define a workflow, but then when it doesn't quite work right, or something like it's hard to know, like, oh, it created all these containers, but what happened, right? So Kashti is around seeing the workflow. Maybe you put something in parallel that should have been sequential. You'll see that in a visualization much easier than you'll see that in code. Right, and likewise with logs, like maybe that thing crashed because you had bad data input and the rest of your workflow blew up, and I don't know which container to go find, use kube control, do the logs. If I have a visualization, I can see, oh, there's the failure, let me see the logs and figure it out. So I think it's one side, Brigade is about making it super easy for people to define these things, and then Kashti is about making it super easy for people to understand what they defined, right, at some level.
How is it visualized? Is it like sequential or?
It's a UI. I think probably the closest thing is like a CI tool or something like the new Jenkins pipelines view. GitLab, it's kind of inspired by that, but it's really designed to be general purpose, right? CI is one of the use cases, but there's lots of other things you could write with this. Kubernetes admission controller. You could write, ETL jobs. You want to do data processing workflows. Lots of different things you can use Brigade to accomplish.
Excellent. And I'm just kind of curious, what sort of workflows are you seeing amongst your user base? What sort of things are they? What sort of complexities are they creating?
Well, right now, I'd say a lot of the focus is around what I would call replacing Jenkins. And a lot of people want, and it's not that Jenkins is bad, because people are extremely successful with it. We use it, lots of people use it, but people are looking for something more modern, something more lightweight, and something that's Kubernetes native, right? You stand up this big Kubernetes cluster with all this compute capacity, and then you kind of run Jenkins on the side, right? And it just doesn't feel very natural when you have all this at your disposal. So we're actually doing a lot of work to try and realize that vision of like Kubernetes as a uniform compute substrate. Let's run all the things on it, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think that it's also the case that very rapidly batch processing moves from being, oh, it'd be great if I could run one of these, to, oh, it'd be great if I could run 10 of these in parallel, to being like, oh, I want to run those, and then when they're done, I want the output to go to this other thing and do another analysis in parallel. And so, I think we're starting to see patterns emerge for how you put these pieces together in a workflow, and having the compute be encapsulated in a container is also really nice, because it means you reason about what each job does independently inside the context of that container, and then you reason about how they all come together in the context of the Brigade file. So that sort of separation of concerns and even reusability is really powerful.
Excellent. So any sort of complex workflow would be, it makes it easier to containerize it and put it in Kubernetes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think without some of the overhead of, some of the larger traditional workflow engines, like writing a JavaScript program is a pretty approachable thing for most people. And so I think that's really great too. I think oftentimes these things become fancy drag and drop GUIs and plugins that you need to learn and stuff like that. I think having it be in one simple source code in a well understood language really helps. You can unit test it. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do because it's in a programming language.
Excellent. Well, I got you guys here. We got the upcoming Kubernetes 1.9. And you guys use an upstream version of.
Yeah.
Okay, so what new features are coming down do you think would resonate particularly with the Azure user base?
Sure. All right. So I think one of the things I'm pretty excited about is Windows containers hitting beta in the 1.9 release. That's a great thing. That's a real representation, not just of the work that our team has done, the Windows team has done, but also partners like Apprenda have done. So there's a community effort there, as well as integration with kubeADM, which is a way of standing up on-premise clusters. In Azure, it's really easy to stand up a Windows containers cluster, but if you're on-premise, it's not that easy, right? And the kubeADM tool was really built to solve that problem initially for Linux, and now it will also work for Windows machines. So that's a great step forward. Something I'm excited about.
Yeah, one of the other things I mentioned is we we try to help out as much as we can with the Kubernetes community. And one of the things I'm pretty proud of is folks like Jay Singer-Dumars on our team are actively leading these release processes, which is no small task. I mean, this is a lot of companies, a lot of developers, a lot of commits coming in, and making sure that process works smoothly is something that is an area where, for example, us and Google work, I think, extremely well on just making sure that we can keep the trains running and make sure that all the folks who are depending on Kubernetes can get a stable release at a reliable cadence.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. I was talking to someone a while ago about like the role of a maintainer, and I think while that's a great role in an open source project, I think it's also really important to highlight all of these people who don't necessarily do the maintainership, but do release engineering, who do community organization, who do all of the stuff that makes the community function. People like Michelle Narali, who's up on the steering committee with me, and who are volunteering their time to help try and keep this community that's growing at an exponential rate sort of headed in the right direction with the right processes and the right policies around things. It's great to see.
Just kind of from not in any sort of official way, but just kind of from what you see with traditional, what we used to call Microsoft shops. Do you think they'll adopt Kubernetes in-house, or do you think they'll just go straight to Azure?
I think both, I'd say. I would say, I think definitely you're seeing people who are viewing a transition to cloud as an opportunity to change how they do things. But I also think that people are seeing Kubernetes as a way to kind of bridge the gap between on-prem and cloud, and really run things in a hybrid way. Maybe even for, not even as a transition, but just as they'll have some stuff in the cloud, they'll have some stuff on-prem. So I think both sides are present.
And I think by and large, customers of all kinds, not just Azure and Microsoft customers, are focused on outcomes and less so on specific technologies. I mean, here at Kubecon, we obviously care deeply about that, and that's important to everyone here. I think customers are concerned about reliability, scalability, how fast can they move in terms of just software delivery process, and I think Kubernetes can benefit those things, but that's not the lens through which a lot of people are looking at this. A lot of people are just looking at the suite of Azure services and trying to decide which one makes the most sense.
Absolutely, I think that's definitely true.
Nice. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking time to get us caught up to speed.
Absolutely, not a problem. Thank you for having us.
Good Kubecon.
All right.
Listen to more episodes of The New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.